Most of the time, we're going to use either the treble or the bass clef when we're writing down music for people to play. Sometimes we use both of them together in the case of the piano. But there are actually a couple of other clefs that it's really good to know about, and they're not that difficult to learn how to read, so it's worth having a look at them now. So here's an example of one of these clefs. It's more unusual. We don't see it quite as often as a treble or bass clef, and it's known as the alto clef. And the reason it's known as the alto clef, if you think of the way we write for voices, we normally have in a choir, say, a soprano part, an alto part, a tenor part, and a bass part. And way back in the history of music, we used to have a special clef for each of those particular parts of the music, and that would obviously relate to the range of notes that each voice would sing. So the sopranos or the trebles, if it was a choir with young boys in it, would be singing the highest notes. And we've got this thing, the treble clef, which we use to show the highest notes. If you think of the violin, they tend to play the highest notes in the string family, and so we use the treble clef to notate their music. Equally, there's the bass voice that tends to sing the lowest voices, and so we use that clef, the bass clef, to notate the notes in the range of the lowest voice. So things that we might play with the left hand of the piano or on the cello. But there is this thing, the alto clef, which is useful for writing down some of the in-between notes, if you like, so not quite as high necessarily as the soprano part or the treble part might be, but a little bit lower, and one that's sort of more about the middle of the texture when we're listening to music. And there is one instrument which uses the alto clef probably more than any other, and that is the viola. And of course the viola is just a slightly lower, slightly richer sounding violin. And I happen to play the viola, and sometimes we're the butt of people's jokes. Sometimes people say, oh, well, you end up playing the viola because you could never become a violinist. Your fingers weren't fast enough to play all those difficult violin parts. And I think that's very cruel. So if you play the viola, you should be absolutely encouraged that it's a really important part of any piece of music. For orchestra, for example, I think the violas are actually the heart of the sound. Also, when you play in the orchestra, you get like the best seat in the house because you get to sit right in the middle of all of this amazing sound happening. One of the other great things, of course, is your music will be written in the alto clef. And so if you're a viola player, you probably know this clef already. So why do we use this clef for writing down music for the viola? Well, it turns out that it's just really well suited to the kinds of pitches that a viola is normally playing. It tends to play notes that are a little bit lower than the violin, and so this clef, because it represents a slightly lower range of pitches, allows us to include the normal everyday notes of the viola on the lines and spaces of the clef. If we were to use the treble clef, we'd end up with a lot of our notes not fitting on the lines and spaces. So how can we read this thing? Is it as straightforward as the treble clef? Well, essentially it is. It's just that the lines and spaces represent different notes. All you need to do to remember how this clef works is to know that this type of clef, this sort of squiggle going around here, was known as a C clef. And it's useful because the middle of the clef sits on middle C. So this is the note. This space here is the note that's normally represented exactly between the treble and the bass clefs. But here it's right in the middle, and it just shows how the viola is playing normally somewhere in between the range of the treble clef and the bass clef, and so we have here a clef that nicely represents that middle space. So if we know that this line here represents middle C, just the same way as with the treble and the bass clef, we can just go up through the lines and spaces, and they will represent each of the letter names as we go up. So this next space after the C will be a D. This next line will be an E. This next space will be an F. And this top line will be a G. And we can go downwards by saying that this next space down is going to be a B. And this next line down will be an A. The next space down will be a G. And the next line down will be an F. So there you go, that is the alto clef, used mostly by viola players because it covers their range of pitches so well. There is one other clef which we should probably have a look at, and that's known as the tenor clef, so let's go and have a look at that now.